Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Naya Daur Connections with Aisha Yuki. Today, I am very excited to host Sadaf Jaffer. Sadaf is an American scholar and elected official who has represented the 16th Legislative District in the New Jersey General Assembly since taking office on January 11, 2022. Sadaf served two one-year terms as mayor of Montgomery Township, having taken office on January 3rd in 2019 and completing her term on December 31st, 2020. She is the first woman of South Asian descent to serve as a mayor of a town in New Jersey and the first Muslim woman to serve as a mayor in the United States. Sadaf was first elected to Montgomery's Township Committee in 2017. She is a postdoctoral research associate at the Princeton Institute for International and Regional Studies. So welcome to our show, Sadaf.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Sadaf, it is so inspiring to see Pakistani women trailblazers like yourself inspire the next generation of youth in the United States. What inspired you to get involved in politics?
I've always been involved and interested in public service and trying to make our communities better, and also in politics. I think many of our families do at least follow the news very closely. We hear kitchen table conversations and conversations amongst the grown-ups when we're kids. And so we were always very informed about politics. But I don't think I really saw myself as someone who would run for office for quite a while. Being the child of immigrants, I was very interested in bridging cultures. And so initially when I went to college, I thought I was going to go into diplomacy. And I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. I interned at the State Department. I interned with the Marine Corps and their Cultural Education Center. But then I became very interested in my studies and I pursued a PhD, and I was on an academic track. And that's what brought me to New Jersey. Both my husband and I teach at Princeton University. But, over time, I started realizing the importance of elected office. The first time that I was involved in a campaign was in President Obama's first election, and then for his re-election, I worked with a lot of South Asian organizers with South Asians for Obama. But then over time, again, I started realizing that you couldn't only pay attention to presidential politics. You have to also look at Congress, you have to look at state government, local government. And I was actually in touch with my congressperson, and I wasn't very happy with his policies. And that's when I felt like people like me need to not only advocate to the elected officials, but we need to actually be in elected office ourselves.
That's amazing. So it sounds like during the President Obama's campaign is when you first got the exposure to everything that goes into campaigning. Do you feel like there's a difference between, I'm sure there is a difference between presidential and local races, but how did you decide which office you were going to run for specifically?
Well, that's a really good question. I had never known anyone who had run for office, either in my professional circles, my friends from school, or from my family and my community. And so I just had this thought that, might be good for me to run for office. So I did a program called Emerge, which is for women from the Democratic Party who want to run for office. And one of the things that I do is when I have an idea, and even if I don't know how to get to the goal, I just start talking about it. And so I mentioned to a friend of mine who lives in California that maybe I'll run for office someday. And she told me about the Emerge program. And it was actually the first year that they were accepting applications in New Jersey. So I applied, I got in, and I learned a lot about the nitty-gritty of the whole process. But then I was actually campaigning for someone who was running for Congress, and I was asked to run in my local race because Montgomery at that time had an all-Republican local government. So 5 out of 5 of our township committee were Republican, and there were no Democrats even running against them. So in 2016, I ran as a write-in, and I didn't win. And then in 2017, I ran on the ballot and I won my seat. And that's when I became the first Democrat and the only Democrat in quite a few years who'd been elected to local government. Then thankfully, we took over the majority. I became the mayor. And then, as you mentioned, my journey went from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Emerge sounds like a great resource. So we'll definitely encourage everyone to check it out. So just recently, moving into the next question, the former president of the US recently announced his candidacy for president. What challenges did you face as the first Muslim woman to serve as a mayor in the US, especially as you governed under a federal administration that was openly hostile to minorities and Muslims?
Yes, I think that you should never take anyone's candidacy as a joke. I think that's something that we should have learned the last time, and I hope people take it very seriously this time. Anything is possible in politics. And I think my first lesson about this was when I was in college. And I was in college during the Bush administration, and everyone I knew was very unhappy with his policies in his first term. And they just all thought he was not going to win re-election. And
Mhm.
then he did. So I think I received my shock in 2004.
Yeah.
And that is actually what motivated me when Obama was running to actually put in the work and to actually campaign. Um, I think, for me, it was a motivator, actually. As I said, I ran first in 2016 because I felt like it was really important to have representation. I know that some members of my community were very nervous at that time and were saying, maybe we shouldn't draw attention to ourselves and it's
Yeah.
time for us to run.
Mhm.
But I thought it was really important. And those dog whistles definitely came out when I ran in 2017. My opponents had a flyer that said, my ideas are dangerous and extreme.
Mhm.
Um, and then when I ran recently for state legislature as well, their website, they had a website, Sadaf Jaffer is a radical.
Oh, okay.
Definitely. Yeah, it's not like
Yeah.
subtle. So
Wow.
it definitely weaves its way through. And when I realized I was going to be the first Muslim woman to serve as a mayor in the country, I
Mhm.
remember, my friends and supporters were like, "Oh, you should do a press release. You should." And I actually was a little bit concerned. I just
Yeah.
felt like I'm just one person in this
Yeah.
town. Can I handle that type of attention and focus? And so, I didn't really do a big media blitz or anything,
Yeah.
but once it started getting covered, I did get more kind of hate messages and harassment on social media. So unfortunately, it's woven itself through kind of people who are farther away, but even some people who are nearby, that they just don't like what I represent and my identities. And I think what we do is we just serve the best we can,
Mhm.
build community. So actually, my first year on the local government, there was an anti-Muslim bias crime in Montgomery where someone left pork on a Muslim family's car, and people didn't really know what to do.
Oh, wow.
And I started a discussion group called Montgomery Mosaic, and we talked about all forms of discrimination. We talked about anti-Black racism, anti-immigrant violence,
Mhm.
anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. And I think that was really important because we have to join together. If we want people to support us, we have to support them. And, all forms of hate hurt all of us.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the way to move forward. And it's worked very well in our community.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's so insightful. I think I've had previous guests also who run for office mention this challenge that people don't necessarily understand. I mean, you are literally risking your safety at times, especially in those under that administration specifically. And it's unfortunate that, you weren't able to celebrate the way that, you would have if you felt like your safety wasn't at risk, right? So that's very insightful. So I want to move into some of your policies and your successes. Not only did you govern during a turbulent time in modern American political history, but also during a pandemic. How did you help maintain some of the lowest COVID-19 infections in the state? And what can other leaders learn from your initiatives?
Sure. Well, none of us go into office thinking that we're going to face a crisis like that
Yeah.
because we hadn't faced a pandemic like that in this country for 100 years.
Mhm.
And so, you know, things come up in office, but I would say that my town around January, we started seeing that this was emerging abroad. And I would say actually that my exposure and international background, and I would say even my immigrant background, made me realize that things like this can happen. I think that a lot of Americans just had even less familiarity than the rest of the world, that sometimes you have to put curfews in place or you have to put certain guidelines in place. And it's actually very interesting because the South Asian mayors in New Jersey
Mm-hmm.
were some of the first to enact curfews, to have safety measures. And
Mm-hmm.
so we decided to be cautious. And so we shut down our municipal building and the schools closed actually before we had a single case in Montgomery. But
Okay.
that night we had our first case. And I think that being aggressive, being cautious, I'm sure that it saved lives and we took it very seriously. There were a range of reactions amongst local and state leaders. And I
Yeah.
think that moment for me and for everyone really brought home how important it is that not only your president or your Congress understand science or understand public health and
Mhm.
are willing to make research-based decisions, but it's also extremely important that your local and your state leaders are the
Yeah.
same. And so, I read as much as I could on leadership in a pandemic. I really paid attention and listened to our health advisors and, tried to be as factual and research based as I could. The other thing that I did do, though, was think about the emotional part of it. And
Mhm.
so I started I developed a crisis communications plan,
Mhm.
and we every day would put out exactly how many cases we had.
Mm.
And then eventually, sadly, how many fatalities we had. But I felt like people psychologically needed to know because the uncertainty was so scary.
Yeah.
And I started doing regular video messages to the community as well, just where I would share what I knew. I would talk to our health officer. I would interview, people from our board of health, and I often ended those messages with a poem because I just felt like we needed to connect
Wow.
with each other, and it was more. It was just such an intense time.
Mhm.
So it's like multi-pronged approach, but I think I'm proud of what we did, and I do believe that it helped keep people safe and healthy in Montgomery as much as we could.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a bit mind-boggling from what I recall. And I mean, unfortunately, even now as we're coming out of this pandemic, to see how the parties were divided over just protocol, safety measures. So to your point about science and the importance of people just understanding these basic things, it can definitely go a long way in terms of just leadership around this issue. So the issue of mobilizing women and minorities, that is one that is taking front stage in recent political campaigns, even during this midterm election that just passed. And in your work, I know you focused a lot on this as well. So what are some misconceptions around reaching out to these groups as well as to under-resourced communities that maybe you think people are not aware of?
Sure. So our town in Montgomery is about 40% Asian American.
Mhm.
Yet when I first started getting involved in politics, you would hardly see, Asian Americans participating. And I was at a meeting and I remember a white American person asked me, we do have so many Asian Americans in Montgomery, so why aren't they that involved? And I told him that if you go to a room and
Mhm.
you don't see anyone who looks like you there,
Yeah.
it's intimidating. It makes you feel like, oh, I guess maybe I don't belong here, or, this is a very difficult space to go to. So we have to be proactive in
Yeah.
inviting people, in reaching out and making sure that we're connecting with all the different constituencies in our community. And that's something that I made a priority. When I became mayor, there were no women appointed to the planning or zoning boards. There were,
Mhm.
few racial and ethnic minorities. So I wanted to diversify that.
Okay.
And um, I mentioned Emerge. There are other formal training and mentorship programs, and research has shown that for minorities, for under-resourced communities to get into various fields, whether it's politics, whether it's the law or medicine, you
Mhm.
have to invest in those formal training and mentorship programs because we don't have the informal networks. We don't
Yeah.
have grandparents who are in elected office or
Yeah.
something like that. And that's something that I saw a lot once I was elected, that when I would talk to my fellow elected officials, they would say, oh yeah, my dad was the mayor, or my
Yeah.
mom was on the school board growing up. And so since we don't necessarily have that, we have to invest in the formal programs, and that's really going to make a difference. And I see it making a difference.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and it's actually an observation that I had when I went to law school. The amount of students that I would speak to that would say, "Yeah, my father's a lawyer," and this and that. So, very important to have those resources available. So, I want to dive a little bit more deeper into your legislative accomplishments, including the College Mental Health Services Act, the New Jersey Child Tax Credit, laws on election integrity, transportation, reproductive health care, and gun safety. So you've done so much, during your tenure. Please share with our viewers which of your legislative successes is most dear to you and the type of impact it has made for your community.
Sure, thank you. Um, I believe that all of us bring our histories, our perspectives to our role in government, and that's why it is so important to have people from different lived experiences, from different communities, different age groups represented. And so, coming into my role in the assembly, I serve on the education, health, and state and local government committees, and I think that that really does speak to many of my priorities. I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure that we were investing in mental health. We know that that has always been an issue, but certainly in light of the pandemic and everything that we've been through, we need to invest in that. And so the College Mental Health Services Act was a priority for me as someone who is in higher education and also values the importance of mental health resources, that we are investing in that for our college students. I've also worked on legislation to help support counselors, school counselors in the K through 12 system. And I've met with advocates because I want to make sure that our youngest, members of our communities have the support that they need. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and it's so important that we're supporting them through their childhood so that they develop, all the coping mechanisms, all of the strength to get them through adulthood. It's really the basis is set in childhood. We
Mm,
also get to, establish priorities for the state budget.
mm,
And so I advocated for investments in teen suicide prevention programs, in pediatric mental health beds in a clinic, carrier clinic that's local. So you can see that that interest in mental health services for children, young people especially, really is a part of everything that I do and that I support. The other thing that I'm very passionate about is women's health in general, and
yeah,
certainly maternal health, reproductive rights. And so I've been proud to support legislation that expands access for abortion care, for maternal health services. And that's something that I continue to work on with advocates. And luckily, New Jersey has some of the strongest protections in the country.
yeah,
That's something that I'm proud of, but we can continue to grow in that area. And then just general good governance. And so gun safety, I think, is very important to many people, but certainly to parents and mothers of young children. When my bill came up for a vote in the assembly, there
mhm,
were some who were saying that, you are, you're punishing law-abiding people and
mm,
XYZ. And I stood up, and this was after the tragedy in Uvalde,
yeah,
and I said, in light of what's happened in the mass shootings that we've seen, as a mother of a young child, it's hard to even fathom that sort of pain. And
mhm,
we don't want to be too late. Whatever we can do, we have to balance people's rights, of course, but
yeah,
children have a right to go to school without having to face gun violence. Parents have a
mhm,
right to know that their children are safe. And so some, small changes and small protections can really help. So that's what we've been working on. How do
yeah,
we, again, New Jersey has some of the strongest gun safety regulations in the country. And
yeah.
because of that, we have some of the lowest rates of gun death as well. But we want
Okay.
to make our community even safer and serve as an example for other states who are trying to do the same.
That's fascinating, and that data is so important, right? Because you have all the naysayers. I mean, I am from Texas, and when Uvalde happened, I mean, it was so gut wrenching, to see those pictures and to see the aftermath and just to see the pain of the parents. And I know here Beto O'Rourke really campaigned aggressively on this issue, and unfortunately, the outcome, it wasn't in his favor, but he certainly helped shape the minds of people around it and the issue. But I mean, when you do take a step back and look at nationally what's happening, I mean, I really hope that, you know, other states like Texas do follow suit. So thank you so much for your hard work and leadership there. I mean, ultimately, it sounds like a lot of these policies, the theme that I'm getting at is that it's really youth focused and focused on the next generation and, you know, how we can leave this world a better place, right? And that's amazing. So in addition to your political career, you know, you are a professor at Princeton. What is something that you teach to your students that you wish more people understood about South Asian and Islamic studies?
I think that the motivating principle behind a lot of my research and my teaching is that we really need to expand what our idea of Muslim societies is. We have to expand our idea of what South Asia is, and also diaspora. And so I teach a course on Islam in South Asia through literature and film, and South Asian American literature and film. And I think that the arts are such a wonderful way for people to access a different culture. So often, I think that Muslim societies, especially, are always discussed in terms of politics, and politics is there and it weaves its way through.
Yeah.
But if we approach it through the arts, there's a human element to it that students really connect to. And so I try to give diverse perspectives to show literature all the way from, you know, Al-Biruni's India, through the Baburnama, through Sufi poetry, through, you know, films. We recently watched a film, Daur talking about Muslim experiences. So it's the whole breadth. And I think that, you know, the majority of my students are South Asian. Some of them aren't. But even for those who are from the background, it helps them think, oh, there has always been this diversity of experience, of perspective. And I think it allows that freedom for what the past has been, but also what the future can be.
Mm-hmm. No, that's amazing because so many of us, I guess, first generation or immigrant South Asians who didn't go to school in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, you know, we are really removed from the history there. I would even go as far as to say maybe even our parents' generation that did receive an education there. You know, like you mentioned, it's so politicized, right? So the education system is going to depend on who is in power. I mean, in some of these countries. People aren't even taught their native languages because they are taught like, you know, whatever the national language may be. So all of this does obviously have a trickle down effect on society. So that's interesting. And I wish I could sign up for that class. It sounds amazing. So I want to switch over to last few questions around this recent midterm election that was just held in the US. And I'm sure our viewers would love your analysis on it. So in your opinion, how do you think the results will impact minority communities in the next few years?
Well, I'm a hopeless optimist. So, you know, people will often tell you stories of doom and gloom, you know, that everything is going to be terrible and
Yeah.
people will never get what they want and XYZ. And even going to this election, we were hearing a lot of that, you know, that it's not going to work out the way young people might want or minorities might want.
Mm-hmm.
But I went into it thinking, from what I hear, Gen Z is voting more. And also, I think that you should go into every election thinking it's 50-50. And as you heard, I ran in Montgomery when there were no Democrats elected. And so I had people telling me, oh, you're not going to win. You're just doing this as a symbolic thing. And I said, no, I think I can win. I'm trying. And I believe that, you know, we have to give the voters more credit.
Yeah.
Sometimes people just assume, oh, this is a red area, this is a blue area, nothing can change. Things can always change. There's always an opportunity there if you speak to people. And so I would say what the message is that it's worth it to invest in every race. It's worth it to listen to diverse perspectives. We're seeing so many more minorities and women getting elected for the first time in so many different places that there's no such thing as an unelectable candidate. You know, if people used to worry about that.
Yeah.
No, it's about what their message is. It's about what their policies are and the outreach that they do to their communities. So I think that overall, I'm feeling pretty good. I think that, but I am wary, even more wary of polls and of political reporting than I was before. That don't pay attention to that. Don't get distracted by that. Just focus on the issues that matter to you, and hopefully it'll work out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know just here recently when we were doing some Get Out the Vote initiatives, it felt like we were just really doing as much as we could. We had GOTV campaigns and messages in different regional languages. But unfortunately, the turnout for this midterm, at least in Texas, was not that great. And I know historically, that's always an issue when it comes to midterms when it's not a presidential election year. Why should Pakistani Americans participate, in your opinion, in local, state, and federal elections? And what is at stake if we don't?
Well, to me, when people ask me why I do this, I say that it's an issue of survival. I really think it's basic as that. If there's a pandemic, are your elected officials going to protect you, or are they going to ignore the problem? In so many, that's the most basic thing, and we just saw it a few years ago.
Yeah,
So are you safe? Are your elected officials going to keep your kids safe in school or wherever it might be, or are there going to be proliferation of weapons everywhere?
hmm,
So really, to me, it's about survival, and that we should make it a habit to vote every year. I find this interesting dichotomy where people value democracy. They love democracy, whether
yeah,
it's here or whether it's in South Asia, but they
mhm,
hate politics and they hate politicians. And I'm like, well, you can't have both. If you love
yeah,
democracy, then someone has to run. And just because someone is running for office doesn't mean that they're a terrible person. So I
right,
think the cynicism is just so rampant, and that it makes it depresses voter turnout, because then people are like, oh, everyone's terrible.
yeah,
Everyone's not terrible. I'm here to tell you, most people who are in elected office want to do the right thing. They might have different ideas on how to do that. And that's where you can find out, what are their positions on different policies? What is going to be best? But I would also say, if we want elected officials to pay attention to our communities, we have to participate, because they do look, or does this community vote?
hmm,
Or does it not? If it
yeah,
doesn't, then maybe I will pay a little bit more attention to the communities that do vote, because that's how I'm going to keep in office and I can keep doing the work that's important to me. And if we become that community that votes in every election and every
yeah,
primary, then people will take us more seriously. So I think it's a civic duty. It's getting easier and easier. We're trying to make it as easy as we can in so many different places. Certainly in New Jersey, we have
yeah,
vote by mail, we have early in-person voting, we have day of voting. So I would say just make it a habit, and just take a few hours or half an hour to do a little bit of research on the candidates, on the ballot questions or whatever. Go in and take your kids with you and make it a family event. And if you value democracy, if you value everything that's been built in this country,
hmm.
it's been built because of the work of advocates and elected officials, and we don't want to go down the wrong path. So that's the message I would share.
That's brilliant. I mean, you guys heard it. This is all about, making sure that you value democracy and making sure that your vote counts. But thank you so much, Sada, for your time today. Really appreciate having you here. To all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Assalamu alaikum.